December 7th, 1941. Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor, sank battleships, killed over 2,400 Americans, and dragged the United States into World War II. But what if I told you that almost everything you think you know about Pearl Harbor is incomplete? That behind the official story lies a web of intelligence failures, missed warnings, strategic miscalculations, and secrets that remained hidden for decades. This is the Pearl Harbor attack you never learned about in school. Let's start with something that shocks most people. Pearl Harbor wasn't a complete surprise. In fact, American intelligence had multiple warnings that something was coming. In January 1941, almost a full year before the attack, the Peruvian envoy to Tokyo told the U.S. ambassador that he'd heard from multiple Japanese sources that in the event of war, Japan is planning a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. This information was forwarded to Washington, filed away, and largely forgotten. Now let's talk about what American intelligence knew and didn't know in the days before the attack. Here's a shocking fact. In the week before Pearl Harbor, U.S. Navy intelligence lost track of Japan's aircraft carriers. They simply disappeared from the tracking boards. The 6 carriers that would launch the attack on Pearl Harbor went radio silent and could not be located. When the intelligence officer at Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, reported that he didn't know where the Japanese carriers were, his superior allegedly asked, "Do you mean to say they could be rounding Diamond Head and you wouldn't know it?" Layton's response, "I hoped they would be sighted before now." But here's the thing, losing track of the carriers should have been a massive red flag. Instead, many intelligence officers assumed the carriers were in home waters, training, or in port. Some thought they might be heading south toward the Philippines or Southeast Asia. Why the failure? Part of it was technological. Radio direction finding in 1941 was primitive. If a ship maintained radio silence, it was nearly impossible to locate. The Japanese task force heading to Pearl Harbor maintained strict radio silence for the entire journey. But there was also a human element. Intelligence analysis involves pattern recognition, and the Japanese had never done anything like this before. Carrier task forces were typically used to support amphibious landings or to engage enemy fleets. The idea of using carriers to launch a surprise attack thousands of miles from home against a target in peacetime was unprecedented. It was literally outside the framework of what most analysts considered possible. There's also the issue of what's called mirror imaging in intelligence analysis. American planners looked at the situation and thought, what would we do? The answer was clear. We wouldn't risk our carriers on such a dangerous operation. Therefore, neither would Japan. This assumption nearly destroyed the Pacific Fleet. One more thing that's often overlooked. There were actually radar contacts of the incoming Japanese planes. At 7:02 a.m. on December 7th, a radar station at Opana Point detected a large formation of aircraft 137 miles north of Oahu. The operators reported it to the information center. The officer on duty, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, made a fateful decision. He knew that a flight of B-17 bombers was expected from the mainland that morning, and he assumed that's what the radar was detecting. He told the operators not to worry about it. It was an honest mistake, but it cost the defenders at Pearl Harbor their last chance for an early warning. Let's talk about how the Japanese actually planned and executed this operation, because the level of detail and audacity is remarkable. The attack was the brainchild of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet. Ironically, Yamamoto had studied at Harvard, served as a naval attaché in Washington, and knew America better than most Japanese officers. He actually opposed going to war with the United States because he understood American industrial might. He supposedly told the Japanese government, "I can run wild for 6 months, maybe a year. After that, I have no confidence." But once the decision for war was made, Yamamoto knew Japan's only chance was to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet immediately. The plan was audacious to the point of seeming suicidal. 6 aircraft carriers would sail over 3,000 miles across the North Pacific in winter, maintaining complete radio silence, avoiding all shipping lanes, and arrive undetected at a launch point 230 miles north of Oahu. The Japanese task force left Hitokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands on November 26, 1941. It consisted of 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 3 submarines, and 8 support vessels. The carriers held 414 aircraft. The fleet refueled at sea multiple times during the journey, a complex and dangerous operation in rough winter seas. Everything depended on secrecy. If they were detected, the element of surprise would be lost, and American carriers might catch them at a disadvantage. Japanese sailors were forbidden from throwing anything overboard that might float and give away their position. They couldn't even throw away their garbage. The attack plan itself was meticulously detailed. There would be 2 waves. The first wave would consist of 183 aircraft: fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and level bombers. Their targets were clearly prioritized: battleships first, then aircraft carriers if any were in port, then cruisers and destroyers, then shore installations and aircraft. The torpedo bombers faced a particular challenge. Pearl Harbor was only 40 feet deep in most places. Conventional aerial torpedoes dropped from aircraft would dive to 100 feet or more before leveling off, meaning they'd plow straight into the harbor bottom. Japanese engineers developed special, shallow-running torpedoes with wooden fins that could operate in Pearl Harbor's depth. They also studied the British torpedo attack on the Italian fleet at Taranto in 1940, learning lessons about attacking ships in harbor. Dive bombers would target ships the torpedo bombers couldn't reach, as well as airfields to destroy American planes on the ground. Level bombers flying at high altitude would drop armor-piercing bombs converted from 16-inch naval shells. These were designed to penetrate the thick armored decks of battleships. The level of intelligence the Japanese had gathered about Pearl Harbor was remarkable. They had detailed maps showing the locations of every significant building, fuel tank, and ship berth. They knew the routine schedules of the Pacific Fleet. They even knew that on Sunday mornings, most ships would be in port with reduced crews, many sailors on shore leave. One source of this intelligence was particularly audacious. A Japanese spy named Takeo Yoshikawa operated out of the Japanese consulate in Honolulu throughout 1941. He would pose as a tourist, taking boat rides around the harbor, visiting high points overlooking the naval base, counting ships, noting patterns. The information he sent back to Tokyo was crucial to planning the attack. Remarkably, he was never caught, and after the war, he returned to Japan. Now let's talk about what actually happened on December 7th, including details that often get left out. At 6 a.m., the Japanese carriers turned into the wind and began launching aircraft. The sea was rough, the carriers pitching in heavy swells. It was dangerous flying weather, but the attack went forward. By 6:20 a.m., all 183 aircraft of the first wave were airborne and heading south toward Oahu. At 7:48 a.m., Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, leading the first wave, looked down at Pearl Harbor spread out below him. He could see the battleships lined up along Battleship Row, the airfields with planes parked wingtip to wingtip. No fighters rose to challenge them. No anti-aircraft fire met them. He sent the signal that meant complete surprise had been achieved. Tora! 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 Tiger! 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 What happened next was devastating. Torpedo bombers came in low and slow, skimming just above the water, releasing their torpedoes at battleships that had no time to react. The USS Arizona was hit, by an armor-piercing bomb that penetrated her forward magazine. The explosion was so massive that it lifted the entire bow of the ship out of the water. The Arizona sank in 9 minutes, taking 1,177 sailors and Marines with her. It remains the single greatest loss of life on any U.S. warship.